everyone, Kareem right here. Today we have Mr. David Simeone, who is the Director of Education Programs at United Soccer. Mr. David, thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, can you just take us? I know this is way far back, but can you take us back in time and share how you got involved into the beautiful game?
Well, some things in life you can't really plan that well out. Obviously, our exposure to sport is one of those things. So, growing up in northeastern Ohio, I grew up in a really ethnic environment. A lot of Croatians, a lot of Serbians, a lot of Italians, and I can remember the first time that I actually saw a soccer game was just a bunch of guys up at a public school, grown men, and they were kicking the ball around. And it happened to be a couple of the sons of the local barber in our neighborhood. And I remember having this conversation with them as I'm watching them play this game with their feet. I'd never seen. I was only 7, 8 years old. He said, "Well, what do you think about that? What?" I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. He said, "Well, yeah, it's calcium. It's football." And my whole point of reference to that at that moment was the Cleveland Browns in football. And so I remember turning around to this guy who cut my hair and he said, "That does not look like the Cleveland Browns to me. How can that be football?" And then he went on to explain me, but that was at a time when we didn't get soccer games every day on TV. We were introduced to the game through people and through our communities, people that were on the grass and playing. And so that was my introduction to it. And of course, as a kid, it's the time where you can become fascinated with things. So that's how my fascination and my exposure and my lifetime in the game kind of started.
Yeah, that sounds so organic to the way how the world's so digitalized now, and just with social media, and you mentioned being introduced by seeing these people and
Right.
playing on the grass, right? Like it's so different. How do you feel about the digitalization of the world now and the new youth coming up?
Well, it's certainly changed even since the 2000s. I mean, and prior to, let's say, 1990, we were still, I think, in a mode where even on cable, it we were not as exposed and dealing with sport and soccer on a 24-hour basis. So now the great thing about it is that information and viewing soccer, you can go to ESPN on the app and you can watch Division Two and Division Three men's and women's college soccer. You can also watch games from the Dutch league or Bundesliga 2. So it's tremendous because now you get this menu and this view of soccer that we would have never had just 20 years ago, really. Um, so it's tremendous from that perspective, a viewing perspective. It's tremendous because you can get a lot of information when you get into um, all the various independent avenues for coaching information. So there's a lot of upside to it. The downside is you have to discern for yourself what is going to be useful for you or what you're going to be interested in, what is going to be a trusted source when you talk about coaching information, coaching education, what is going to be useful for you at your level. So I think it's got a lot of upside. It also breeds a certain degree of globalization and a cross pollination of ideas. And it's good, but what is less and less distinctive is 40 years ago, European soccer on the continent looked very different than soccer in England, Scotland, or Ireland. European soccer looked and behaved a little differently than South American soccer. There are still some distinctions, but there's a lot more globalization. And the effect of that globalization is that it kind of starts to look a little bit homogenous. So
Understood.
there's some real upsides to it, but it also creates and compounds some issues to think about.
Understood. I mean, I think it's very important what you said is that, having information coming from a trusted source, and United Soccer Coaches is a very well known and trusted source of information, and um, a lot of experience and knowledge is there for the next generation to tap into. But before we get into that, can you give us like your life timeline of your life in soccer? So did you start playing, and then did you go to school? Can you just give us that, I guess, that fast timeline of your life
Yeah.
from youth to where you are now?
Well, I mean, there was not a very suburbanized plan of youth soccer when I grew up. So we played a lot on our own. We had a lot of ownership in it. Then by the time 16, 17, playing um, in with a men's team, a Ukrainian Orthodox men's team on the west side of Youngstown, Ohio, and getting those experiences where now you're not playing with other 17-year-old boys. You're playing with a 27-year-old who's working in a steel mill, or a 28-year-old that works in the railroad. So it was different because they were not going to allow a 16 or 17-year-old kid to come in and run the show. So there was a lot of making your bones that had to go on. I was in service after that, and was involved with one of the first all Navy teams. I was in the U.S. Navy and got involved with that. That was put together way back in 72, 73, and it was a great experience with the college, University of Northern Colorado. And then from there, I mean, it was pretty indirect how I started dabbling in coaching. And it's funny how associations and friendships and people that you become acquainted with through playing or through coaching. And so I was dabbling. I was back in Denver. I was coaching a little bit. Weren't a lot of full time positions in club soccer at that time. So I actually got nudged into graduate school. Shellis Hyman, great friend and colleague, he nudged me into graduate school in 1983 at Midwestern State University. And so it was one of the top men's NAIA programs. And a lot of things opened up from there because just being a couple hours outside of Dallas at that time, John Casaboon was the state director of coaching in North Texas. And he opened the door for me to come in and start coaching with the state teams. And really, that was very early in coaching women. And so John gave me the opportunity. And I think in my first state team, I had kids like Brandy Barnes, Carla Overbeck, and it was just a tremendous experience. It was new for all of us because none of us had really coached women that much. So from there, I served a little over 10 years between North and South Texas as the state director of coaching. And at that time, I mean, really, ODP was the avenue from the clubs that we developed and promoted, evaluated kids into the national team. So both on the men's and the women's side, we had in Texas, we had an array of players make it in not only youth national teams, but eventually, I mean, into the senior national team. It was just a very special time in Texas, like something I could have never planned for. Is while in graduate school, when there was no real competitive women's soccer in Wichita Falls, Texas, guys in our men's college program kept talking about a young lady playing in town who was extraordinarily talented. And so I went out to see her play, but because there were no other avenues to play, she was playing with a high school boys team. Her name was Mia Hamm. So having that kind of experience was just was just ridiculous. And so I was lucky enough to be hired by Tony DiCicco full time in and around just before the '99 World Cup. And prior to that, I had been working with Shannon Sorofsky with the under 18s and with the national teams program on the women's side predominantly. So until just after the Olympics in 2004, I'd spent with the women's team, and that was a tremendous experience. Again, it was a very unique time. And then between 2004 and last year, it was just coaching, managing, directing in high performance clubs, Cincinnati United Premier, the Sereno Soccer Club in Scottsdale, Weston Soccer Club in Florida. So that is kind of up to date. That's a lot of information, but that's kind of up to date and how I kind of got here.
Yeah, so you've had tons of great experience and must have an abundance of knowledge, from all the experience that you've had. With saying that, let's talk a little bit about the the dollar figure. How much? It was obviously different back then, but how much are coaches looking to make now? Um, can you provide a little bit of information about that, and people that come across this video, if they want to become coaches, what they're looking
Right.
at making?
Well, it's different. You're right, um, Kareem. It's very very different now. Let's say back in 1983 in Dallas, there were only about 7 competitive clubs in the whole city. Now there are over 200, which means there's a greater prevalence of paid coaches. So probably there were only a handful of people really making a significant amount of money. Um, Today, there's a lot more opportunity for all that. It's good, but it also moves what the industry standards are. So certainly there are club directors who are making into 6 figures. You would think that in the marketplace, people that prove their value are probably going to make more money, but there's just more opportunity to make money and a profession out of this than there was 40 years ago.
Mm, understood. On my side, I'm starting to see a lot more players at a younger age getting to coaching, and
Yep.
professional players starting their own platforms, especially with the technology that we have today. So it's pretty cool and moving fast, like everything else. You've spent 31 years with United Soccer Coaches. That's a long time. So, you know, let's tap into that, and why 31 years. That's a lot of love.
No, it is. I mean, I can tell you my first conventions were in 1983 and 1984. And the convention was very, very different at that time. There were only about 300 plus coaches at the convention at that time. The sessions that were demonstrations were in ballrooms at best, and sometimes in smaller meeting rooms where the biggest concern was how did how does the group of players and the clinician presenting not smash a ball into a chandelier. I mean, so it was very very different. um, the board of the organization was much more operational than it is now. It's oversight. um, it was very distinctively different. So my first couple of conventions, were eye-opening. Once a year, there was no internet in the 1980s. America's a big place. The United States is a big place. So the connections that you could make there in that environment was just unbelievable. So I was probably about 1987, 88 when I get a call from, I think it was Jay Martin, who's still at Ohio Wesleyan, and Jeff Fennell, about doing instructing some coaching education. And, we were all on the front end of that. I can remember when coaching education programs were on a couple of pieces of paper. Now it's just expansive. It's voluminous how much information that there is. So I think it was about 86, 87, 88 that I started doing coaching education with United Soccer Coaches, then the National Soccer Coaches Association of America, and started doing the national diplomas probably in the early to mid 90s. And since that time, I've been fortunate enough working with all our previous directors of coaching, currently Vince Gansberg, Ian Barker, Jeff Tipping, Peter Gooding, all really outstanding people and outstanding coaches. And it's been tremendous. I can't say I've not enjoyed 1 minute of it. It's been tremendous.
And you've probably seen a lot of things too, right? Um, throughout your time there. With saying that, I do want to plant some seeds. I'd love to meet you in person, learn from you, shadow you. I'm not too sure if you're still involved in the coaching experience because I know now you are the director of education programs at United Soccer. With saying that, did you enjoy your time there before, or do you enjoy it more now?
Well, I think all of these roles have changed in the complexity of what we need to do in all of our roles and in work together across the various departments. It's much more complicated. It was pretty straightforward 30 years ago in terms of scheduling courses and developing content, developing curriculum within the courses. We have we're not essentially starting from scratch and inventing it. In the early days of coaching education, the predominant thing in our mind was, what do we want the coaches to learn? Well, we can't have them attend one course and it's going to serve all their needs. So that's where the tiering of the courses, the diplomas, the national, the advanced national, the premier, and now Paul Marco, Paul Payne, Shellis Hyman are all involved in developing the modern trends of the game course, which is going to be, it's just going to be tremendous because it's all contemporary information. So I think differentiating these different levels, that was part of the evolution of it. Now it takes on a different role too because of all the technology, the things we can do in blended courses, blending education with in-person. I think our big emphasis is to get back in person as much as we can because I feel, and I think Vince feels the same way, that the interpersonal interaction that you get when you're in the same place with your colleagues, your cohorts, and coaching educators is very unique, and it's a unique part of the learning process. So we enjoy all that. I mean, I think as coach educators, over time, you see people grow. There's an incredibly unique relationship that we have with coaches that come through these courses. And sometimes mentorship is formed. Sometimes you go years without hearing or seeing someone, even on social media, as prevalent as that is now. And you always have an incredible bond and relationship because of the experiences that you have in education. And this is part of what binds us in the organization over the course of the decades that we've been the biggest soccer organization in the world. And that is, we all are united about how infatuated we are with the game, with coaching players. I think part of the coach, whether he's working or she's working at the pro level, the college level, it doesn't matter. We're curious by nature. We are inquisitive by nature. How did that happen? How do I get my players to do it? How did that coach see that in that set of circumstances? What can I learn from that? So I think we are curious by nature, and we all are bound by this incredible fascination and enthusiasm we have for the game, for players, and for education. So it's it's a it's a conducive place to be together and to have an affinity with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, with saying that, you mentioned the convention center, that in-person interaction. Are you looking forward to the next one coming up for next year, January
Yes, we
11th?
are. No, in January of 23, I mean, everyone is excited, first of all, because it's back in person. I think we're on the other side of the unfortunateness of the pandemic. Um, Philadelphia is a has had a great history of hosting us in the convention. Um, and so, yes, we're very excited. It's been very, very new for me because although I've presented at conventions previously, and I served on the board in 92, 93, and 94, and I saw it from that perspective when the board was more operational. We had far fewer people within the office, but seeing it from this side and kind of directing the content and working with our event managers, Erica Dyer, in her role as the convention manager, um, Rudy Zimmerman, who schedules the convention, to see what he does, and then be able to talk with our CEO, Jeff Van Dusen. And he spent 10 years developing the convention. I'm looking at it strictly from a content perspective. I have all these great people who are resources that I get a chance to work with and do my gig with. So I look at it just from a content perspective, and it's a new experience from this side of the curtain. Believe me, it's wonderful.
I can imagine. I'm even trying to wrap my head around the 10-year process and where it is now. It's going to be massive.
Oh,
And, even with yourself, I admire, the management side of things. I think that's a very powerful um, tool to have and to be able to, um, you know, experience on a day-to-day basis. And I'm still curious to learn more on that and experience that myself. I try to keep that as simple as possible.
yeah.
uh,
No, and from an experience standpoint, I mean, we have about 200 over a 5-day period between classroom presentations and field sessions. There are probably about 250 sessions. And getting an understanding the balance of the sessions, the content, how they connect between classrooms, sometime in lecture, um, doing things in the classroom like panel discussions and roundtables. I mean, it really, we have content for the youth coach who's at the grassroots, the youth coach who's in a more of an elite performance oriented environment, um, a high school coach, which is its own separate and dedicated dimension um, to soccer coaching, just as much as college coaches are separate. They have their own kind of world that they operate in. And then, of course, I mean, the folks that are professionals at some level within the professional triangle. So there is legitimately information there that touches every level.
for sure. I apologize for the 10-minute timer there. I don't have a plan with Zoom, so they're trying to kick us off. um, but I also want to, share the offering that you're going to have at the convention. Can you share that with our viewers?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, we've got about 10 diplomas in professional development program tracks, and that goes from anything having to do with like our foundations of coaching diplomas. We've also got um, coaching the complete player, which is about holistic development of players. We have club leadership and club organization. We have a goalkeeping track. We have a track for uh, women. In fact, we went outside the lines a little bit. We've scheduled in some really interesting sessions incorporating not only the coaching component of it, but women who are executives now in the game. So from that perspective, we got like 10 different diplomas and professional tracks. We also have a whole array of mental performance and mental skills coaches, people like Dan Abrams, Paul McVeigh, Rachel Lindvall, Donna Fisher, all of those people. What Drives Winning with Becky Burley and Brett Ledbetter, they are doing and offering a set of 3 programs with us where they are locking in some very high level and prominent coaches and former coaches to come in and to talk about what's going on in the coaching world in other sports and talk about it from a perspective of the function of coaches, how it's changing. A goalkeeping track and our head of goalkeeping, Lisa Cole, we've got a whole offering there. So like I said, we have everything from the youth grassroots environment up through the pros. We want to look at sessions by the Scottish FA, the Irish FA, the FAI. We have NWSL coaches, and it's just an array. It is an array of information and experiences. We're very, very excited about it.
Yeah, I am too. I'm very excited to learn more, to be there, experience it with you guys, and meet you, David, meet the other people at United Soccer Coaches. So very excited, and I hope to see anyone that watches this video there as well in Philadelphia. And just to end off here before we dive into the fun questions, the last question I want to ask you is, what's the biggest challenge you faced in your career?
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that I learned, maybe a little retrospectively, it took me time to plug into was when you're coaching either high performance club players or during my time with the national team, we are so consumed with moving the meter. We're so concerned with moving player development. We're so concerned and absorbed with how do we get our teams to perform? How do we get a chance to win games? And sometimes you get so wrapped into that, sometimes it's really hard just to enjoy it. You're so geared up to perform, it's really challenging, or it was for me, to enjoy it and to savor it. So I think that was probably my biggest challenge, is just to get off of being totally performance driven and enjoy people in that moment, enjoy the moment itself.
Yeah, very true. Last 5 fun questions. There's 3 questions, so we're gonna like fly through them. Who's your favorite U.S. soccer team?
My favorite teams are the U.S. men and the U.S. women.
What about in like the MLS? Do you have a favorite? Do you watch the MLS?
Yep, no, for sure we watch MLS. I mean, there's not really a single team that I mean, I remember when Mr. Hunt bought the old Dallas burn. That was, I mean, Dallas always has a special place in my heart. But now I look at Oscar Pereira coaching at Orlando City, a great guy. I like Orlando City. So I like the domestic version of our professional game a lot.
Got it. Who's your favorite European team, soccer wise?
European team, I'm kind of a Serie A guy. I started out years ago when we could only get one game a week with the Bundesliga, and the Bundesliga teams were great. Right now I have great friends at Eintracht Frankfurt. They just won a big game the other day, so I want to congratulate them. But also, I'm a Serie A guy, so I like Roma.
Nice. Who's your favorite player?
I have a couple. I have to say, Carlo Verbeek is one of my all-time favorite players, and the other one is Eric Cantona.
What about your favorite food?
Favorite food, got to go with the Italian, got to go with the eggplant parmesan.
Parmesan. And last one, favorite artist musically.
Music, favorite artist, it's a toss-up between Stephen Stills and Bonnie Raitt.
Nice. Awesome. Was there anything that I missed or anything that you wanted to add on?
No, sir. It's been a real pleasure getting to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in Philadelphia.
Likewise. David, before we go, I just want to thank you for taking the time for joining us on the One Soccer Nation podcast today.
Thank you.